The scorching July sun beat down on the tarmac of Fort Campbell Military Airport as Staff Sergeant James Mitchell's transport plane touched down. After 15 long months in Afghanistan, the 32-year-old soldier was finally coming home. His heart raced with anticipation as the aircraft came to a complete stop. James adjusted his camouflage uniform and grabbed his military-issued duffel bag, his weathered hands gripping the straps tightly. The other soldiers around him wore the same expression of exhaustion mixed with excitement. They had all dreamed of this moment during countless nights in the desert, through firefights and long patrols. Standing in line to exit the plane, James pulled out his wallet and looked at the worn photograph he kept inside. It showed his wife Sarah, with her warm smile and honey blonde hair, holding their son Tommy on his 8th birthday. The picture was taken just 2 weeks before his deployment. Now, Tommy would be almost 10 years old. James had missed so much: birthdays, school events, little league games, all the moments that made up a young boy's life. As he walked down the airplane steps, memories of his last deployment day flooded back. Tommy had clung to his leg, crying and begging him not to go. Sarah had tried to stay strong, but James had seen the tears in her eyes as she kissed him goodbye. Their weekly video calls had been precious, but couldn't replace being there in person. The waiting area was packed with families holding welcome home signs and American flags. James scanned the crowd, his trained eyes searching for his loved ones. Then he saw them: Sarah standing near the back, looking more beautiful than he remembered, wearing the blue sundress he had always loved. Next to her stood Tommy, so much taller than James had expected, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Something about Tommy's posture caught James's attention. The boy wasn't jumping up and down with excitement like the other military kids. Instead, he stood slightly behind Sarah, his eyes fixed on the ground. James dismissed the observation, thinking it was just the shock of seeing him in person after so long. "Daddy." Tommy's voice cut through the crowd's noise, but there was an odd strain in it that James couldn't quite place. Sarah nudged their son forward, and the boy walked toward his father with slow, hesitant steps, so different from the energetic child James remembered. James dropped his duffel bag and knelt down, opening his arms wide. Tommy moved into his embrace, but his small body felt stiff, not melting into the hug like he used to. James held him tight anyway, breathing in the familiar scent of his son's shampoo, feeling the softness of his hair against his cheek. "I missed you so much, buddy," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Tommy nodded but remained silent. Sarah approached them, wiping tears from her eyes. When James stood to embrace her, she wrapped her arms around him fiercely. "Welcome home, soldier," she said, but there was something in her voice too, a slight tremor that didn't match her smile. As they walked to the parking lot, James noticed more unusual details. Sarah and Tommy exchanged quick glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Tommy kept his distance, walking slightly ahead or behind, avoiding the casual touches and playful moments that used to be normal between them. In the car, James tried to start conversations about Tommy's school, his baseball team, and his friends, but the boy's answers were short and careful, as if he was measuring every word. Sarah filled the awkward silences with cheerful chatter about neighborhood news and family updates, but her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. James felt a growing unease in his stomach. 15 months was a long time, but this felt like more than just normal readjustment. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him something was very wrong. As they pulled into their driveway, James noticed small changes to their home: new curtains in the windows, a different welcome mat, fresh flowers in the garden boxes. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect, like a picture in a magazine. But beneath the surface, something felt off balance, like a puzzle with a piece that didn't quite fit. Little did James know, this was just the beginning. The secret that would shake his world to its core was waiting, hidden behind his son's nervous glances and his wife's too bright smile. For now, though, he was just a soldier coming home, trying to bridge the gap that 15 months of separation had created in his family. The first evening at home felt strange for James. The house was exactly as he remembered it, yet somehow different. The familiar family photos on the walls seemed to watch him as he carried his bags upstairs to the master bedroom. Sarah had kept everything spotless, just the way he liked it, but there was an underlying tension in the air that he couldn't shake. Tommy had disappeared into his room almost immediately after they got home, saying he had homework to finish. It was summer vacation, and James knew there shouldn't be any homework, but he didn't push the issue. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, insisting on making James's favorite dinner, her special meatloaf with mashed potatoes. As James unpacked his bags, he found a small box he carefully wrapped in Afghanistan. Inside was a handmade wooden car he bought from a local craftsman for Tommy. He grabbed the gift and walked to his son's room, knocking softly on the door. "Come in." Tommy's voice was barely audible through the door. James stepped inside and found Tommy sitting at his desk, frantically shoving papers into a drawer. The boy's face was flushed, and his hands were shaking slightly. James pretended not to notice. "Hey, buddy, I brought you something from Afghanistan," James said, holding out the box. "Want to open it?" Tommy took the gift with both hands, his eyes avoiding his father's face. He unwrapped it slowly, methodically, nothing like the excited boy who used to tear through Christmas presents. When he saw the wooden car, a small smile appeared on his face, the first genuine expression James had seen since his return. "Thanks, Dad," Tommy whispered, running his fingers over the detailed carving. But then, as if catching himself, he quickly set the car down and returned to his previous nervous state. "Tommy, is everything okay?" James asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The boy's lower lip trembled. "Everything's fine," he said quickly, too quickly. I need to finish something." Before James could respond, Sarah's voice called from downstairs, announcing that dinner was ready. Tommy practically ran from the room, leaving his father sitting there, confused and increasingly worried. At the dinner table, Sarah had outdone herself. The meatloaf was perfect, the potatoes creamy, and she'd even made James's favorite apple pie for dessert, but the conversation was stilted and awkward. Every time James asked Tommy about what he'd been doing while he was away, Sarah would quickly jump in with an answer before their son could speak. James noticed other odd things too. When the phone rang during dinner, Sarah practically jumped out of her chair to answer it, taking the call in the other room with hushed tones. Tommy's eyes followed her, and his fork pushed food around his plate without eating much. After dinner, while Sarah was cleaning up, James went to the living room and found Tommy's school backpack on the couch. A piece of paper was sticking out, and James' military training made him naturally observant. The header caught his eye. It was a permission slip, but not for school. It was from a local medical clinic, dated 3 months ago, with Sarah's signature at the bottom. "Dad!" Tommy's panicked voice made James drop the paper. The boy snatched his backpack and hugged it to his chest, his eyes wide with fear. James started to explain, but Tommy had already rushed upstairs, the sound of his door slamming echoing through the house. Sarah appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "He's just overwhelmed," she said quickly. "It's a big adjustment having you back. Give him time." But James could see the way her hands twisted the towel, the slight tremble in her voice. 15 months in a war zone had taught him to recognize when people were hiding something. His wife and son were keeping a secret, and judging by their behavior, was something big. That night, as James lay in bed next to Sarah, he listened to her breathing, pretending to be asleep. Around midnight, he heard her get up quietly and go downstairs. The soft murmur of a phone conversation drifted up through the heating vent, too quiet to make out the words. James stared at the ceiling, his soldier's instincts on high alert. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start looking for answers. Whatever was going on with his family, he needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next morning, James woke up early out of habit, his internal clock still set to military time. Sarah's side of the bed was empty, but he could smell coffee brewing downstairs. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed for work at the real estate office where she sold homes. "I tried to let you sleep in," she said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "I have to show a house this morning, but I can cancel if you want me to stay home." James shook his head. "No, you should go to work. Tommy and I can spend some time together." He noticed how Sarah's hand paused briefly while stirring her coffee. "Actually," she said, not meeting his eyes, "Tommy has a doctor's appointment this morning. My mom's taking him since I have the showing." "A doctor's appointment? Is he sick?" James asked, concern filling his voice. "Just a regular checkup," Sarah answered too quickly. "Nothing to worry about." Before James could ask more questions, Tommy came downstairs, fully dressed and carrying his backpack. His grandmother's car horn sounded from the driveway. "That's Mom," Sarah said, gathering her things. I'll be home by 5. She kissed James quickly and hurried Tommy out the door, leaving James alone in the suddenly quiet house. With nothing else to do, James decided to clean up Tommy's room, something he used to do before deployment to find hidden candy wrappers or forgotten homework. The room looked different now, with fewer toys and more books. As he straightened the desk, a piece of paper fell from between 2 textbooks. It was a letter, written in unfamiliar handwriting. James knew he shouldn't read it, but the first line caught his eye. "Dear Tommy, I know this must be confusing for you." The rest of the letter was missing, but at the bottom was a signature. "Love, David." James sat heavily on Tommy's bed. Who was David? Why was he writing letters to his son? He searched the desk drawers but found nothing else unusual except for a small key hidden under some school papers. Later that afternoon, James heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway. Tommy ran straight upstairs while Sarah came into the kitchen where James was preparing dinner. "How was the doctor's appointment?" James asked casually. Sarah froze for a moment. "Fine. Everything's fine." "Which doctor did he see?" "Dr. Thompson," Sarah said, but James caught the slight hesitation in her voice. "That's strange," he said, keeping his voice level. "I called Dr. Thompson's office today. They said Tommy hasn't been a patient there for over a year." The color drained from Sarah's face. She gripped the kitchen counter for support. "James, I can explain." But before she could continue, Tommy appeared in the doorway, holding a photograph James had never seen before. In it, a man with dark hair was smiling at the camera, his arm around a younger-looking Sarah. "Mom," Tommy said, his voice shaking, "I can't keep lying anymore." Sarah reached for the photo, but Tommy stepped back. "He deserves to know," the boy said, tears forming in his eyes. James looked between his wife and son, feeling like he was watching a bomb about to explode. "Know what?" he asked, though part of them already feared the answer. Tommy opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah cut him off. "Please, not like this," she begged. "Then when?" Tommy's voice cracked. "When were you going to tell them about David? About the tests?" The name from the letter hit James like a physical blow. "Tests? What tests?" Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her face in her hands. "The DNA tests," she whispered. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Tommy's quiet sobs. James stood perfectly still, his military training kicking in, helping him maintain control even as his world started to crumble around him. "I found the letters in Mom's closet 3 months ago," Tommy said, looking at the floor. "David is." But James held up his hand, stopping the words he wasn't ready to hear. The pieces were falling into place, the nervous behavior, the secret phone calls, the fake doctor's appointment. His son had been carrying this burden alone, trying to protect both his parents from a truth that could destroy their family. The timer on the oven beeped, an oddly normal sound in a moment that was anything but normal. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, and children played in the street, unaware that inside the Mitchell house, a family was balanced on the edge of a revelation that would change everything. The kitchen remained frozen in silence for what felt like hours. James's military training had prepared him for many things, but nothing could have readied him for this moment. He looked at the photograph still clutched in Tommy's trembling hands, then at Sarah, who couldn't meet his eyes. "How long?" James's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah wiped tears from her face. "It was before your deployment. When we were separated for those 3 months, remember? You had moved out." "Stop," James said firmly. He turned to Tommy, who stood rigid against the doorframe. "Buddy, can you go to your room for a few minutes? Your mom and I need to talk." Tommy nodded, placing the photograph on the counter before leaving. His footsteps echoed up the stairs, followed by the soft click of his bedroom door. James picked up the photograph, studying the man's features. David had dark hair like Tommy's, a detail James had always attributed to Sarah's side of the family. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken nearly 11 years ago. "Tell me everything," James said, sitting across from Sarah at the kitchen table. "And don't leave anything out." Sarah's hands shook as she spoke. "David and I dated in college, before I met you. We ran into each other at the grocery store during our separation. I was lonely, confused. It was just a few weeks, James. When we reconciled, I ended it immediately." "And Tommy?" James's voice cracked on his son's name. "I always thought he was yours," Sarah whispered. "The timing, I convinced myself it had to be you. But then David moved back to town 6 months ago. He saw Tommy at a baseball game and noticed the resemblance. James remembered the permission slip he'd seen. The medical clinic, it was for DNA testing. Sarah nodded. David requested it. He had a right to know, and deep down, I needed to know too. The results came 3 months ago. Tommy found the paperwork before I could figure out how to tell anyone. Our son has been carrying this secret for 3 months. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. While I was dodging bullets in Afghanistan, he was dealing with this alone. I tried to protect him, Sarah said desperately. I told him we would wait until you got home, but then he started getting letters from David. He found them in my closet where I'd hidden them. James paced the kitchen, his soldier's discipline warring with his emotions. Does David want custody? No, Sarah said quickly. He just wants to know his son. He's married now, has other children. He said he'd respect whatever boundaries we set. Boundaries? James laughed bitterly. The boundaries were broken the moment you let him back into your life. A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Tommy stood there, tears streaming down his face. Please don't hate me, he sobbed. James's heart shattered. In 3 quick strides, he crossed the kitchen and pulled Tommy into his arms. Listen to me, he said fiercely, kneeling to look his son in the eyes. Nothing about this is your fault. Nothing. And nothing, do you hear me? Nothing could make me hate you. Tommy buried his face in James's shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. But I'm not really yours. Tommy Mitchell, James said firmly, using his surgeon's voice to make sure every word hit home. You have been my son since the day you were born. I was there for your first steps, your first words, every scraped knee and nightmare. DNA doesn't make a father, love does, and I have loved you every single day of your life. Sarah watched them from the table, tears flowing freely down her face. I'm so sorry, she whispered, to both of you. James held Tommy tighter, his own tears falling now. The anger was still there, the betrayal raw and painful, but the love for his son, because Tommy would always be his son, was stronger than any pain. We're going to figure this out, James said, speaking to both Tommy and Sarah. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but we're going to figure it out together. Tommy pulled back slightly, wiping his eyes. What about David? James took a deep breath. The soldier in him wanted to shut this all away, to protect his family by building walls. But the father in him knew that wasn't the answer. That's something we'll need to discuss as a family. But right now, tonight, it's just us. Okay. Tommy nodded, managing a small smile that reminded James of all the reasons he fought to come home. Whatever happened next, whatever storms they had to weather, that smile made everything worth fighting for. The next few days in the Mitchell household were tense. James moved into the guest room, needing space to process everything. He spent his mornings running long distances around the neighborhood, his military training providing the only sense of normalcy he could find. Sarah took a few days off work, trying to be present whenever James was ready to talk. But most of their conversations ended in painful silence or quiet tears. Tommy watched his parents navigate this new reality, feeling caught between 2 worlds that were crumbling around him. On Thursday morning, while Sarah was making breakfast, the doorbell rang. Tommy answered it before anyone could stop him. There, on their front porch, stood David Henderson, the man from the photograph. I'm sorry, David said quickly, seeing Sarah's shocked face appear behind Tommy. I know I should have called first, but Tommy messaged me on social media. He said his father was home and... You need to leave, Sarah interrupted, pulling Tommy behind her. But James had already appeared in the hallway, his face unreadable. No, James said, his voice steady. You should come in. We need to deal with this. The 4 of them ended up in the living room, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Tommy sat between his parents on the couch while David took the armchair across from them. First, David began, I want you to know I never intended to disrupt your family. When I saw Tommy at that baseball game, the resemblance was undeniable. I couldn't just walk away without knowing. James's jaw tightened. And now that you know. Now I want to do whatever's best for Tommy, David said. I have a family of my own, 2 daughters. I'm not looking to take Tommy away or replace you. You're his father in every way that matters. Tommy, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Is that why you wrote those letters? To tell me you didn't want me? No. David leaned forward, his face pained. Those letters were to help you understand that you weren't alone in feeling confused. I wanted you to know that it was okay to love your dad, James, and still be curious about me. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. I should have handled this differently. Keeping it secret only made things worse. We all could have handled things differently, James said, surprising everyone. His military experience had taught him that dwelling on past mistakes didn't help win the current battle. But we're here now, so let's figure out how to move forward. David nodded gratefully. I'd like to get to know Tommy, but only if and when he wants to. Maybe start with supervised visits, or even just email at first. Everything at Tommy's pace. James looked at his son, because regardless of DNA, Tommy would always be his son. What do you think, buddy? This is your choice too. Tommy looked between the two men, the father who had raised him and the one who shared his blood. He started, then stopped, gathering his courage. I want things to stop being secret. I want to know about my sisters, but I don't want a different dad. I just want my family to be okay again. James pulled Tommy close, kissing the top of his head. Then that's what we'll work toward. Your mom and I have some things to figure out, but we both love you more than anything. That will never change. David stood up, recognizing it was time to leave. Take all the time you need. Here's my number, he said, placing a card on the coffee table. Ball's in your court, Tommy. No pressure. After David left, the family sat in silence for a moment. Then Sarah spoke, her voice stronger than it had been in days. We need help dealing with this. All of us. I found a family counselor who specializes in military families and complicated situations. James nodded slowly. His training had taught him that sometimes the bravest thing a soldier could do was ask for help. I think that's a good idea. We've all been trying to protect each other by keeping secrets. Maybe it's time we learned how to protect each other by telling the truth. Tommy hugged both his parents, and for the first time since James had come home, the hug felt real, not stiff with secrets and fear, but warm with hope and love. This wasn't the homecoming any of them had imagined, but as James held his family, he realized that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought on foreign soil, but right at home. And like every battle, this one would require courage, honesty, and most importantly, love to win. 2 weeks after David's visit, the Mitchell family sat in Dr. Rachel Carter's office for their third counseling session. The room was warm and comfortable, with soft chairs and calming blue walls. Tommy sat between his parents, drawing in a sketchbook while the adults talked. James, Dr. Carter said gently, you've been quiet today. What's on your mind? James shifted in his chair, his military posture still evident even in the casual setting. Yesterday, Tommy received an email from David's daughters. They want to meet their brother. Sarah reached for Tommy's hand. How do you feel about that, sweetheart? Tommy looked up from his drawing. They seemed nice. They sent pictures of their dog and their treehouse. But, he glanced nervously at James, I don't want to upset Dad. Son, James said, using the word deliberately, you're allowed to be curious about your sisters. Being interested in them doesn't mean you love me any less. Dr. Carter nodded approvingly. That's a healthy perspective, James. How are you handling your own emotions about this situation? James took a deep breath. In Afghanistan, everything was clear. You knew who your enemies were, who your brothers were. But here, he paused, collecting his thoughts. I keep wanting to be angry at David, but he's not the enemy. He's just another father who loves his kid. And Sarah? Dr. Carter prompted. How are things between you two? Sarah twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed. We're talking more. James moved back to our bedroom last night. Because Tommy had a nightmare, James explained. He dreamed we were both leaving him. Sarah and I realized our issues were hurting him more than helping anyone. Dr. Carter made some notes. Tommy, would you like to share your drawing? Tommy held up his sketchbook. On the page was a detailed drawing of two houses connected by a bridge. This is our house, he pointed to one side, and this is David's. The bridge means we can visit without anyone getting hurt. James felt his throat tighten. Even at 9 years old, Tommy understood more than they'd given him credit for. That's beautiful, buddy, James said. Maybe we could actually build a bridge like that, not between houses, but between families. Sarah wiped away tears. I've been so afraid of losing everything, I almost caused exactly that by keeping secrets. Fear makes us do things we regret, Dr. Carter said. But it's never too late to choose a different path. James, you mentioned Tommy received an email. What would you think about responding as a family? James considered this. His military training had taught him that adaptation was crucial for survival. Maybe this was just another type of adaptation. We could invite them for ice cream, he suggested. Neutral territory. Keep it short, see how everyone feels. Tommy's face lit up. Really? You'd come too, Dad? Of course, James said firmly. You're my son, and I want to be there for every important moment in your life, even the complicated ones. Dr. Carter smiled. That's excellent progress. Sarah, how do you feel about this plan? Terrified, Sarah admitted, but also relieved. No more secrets, no more hiding. It's exhausting trying to keep everyone happy by being dishonest. As they left the counseling session, Tommy walked between his parents, holding both their hands like he used to when he was younger. Outside, the summer evening was warm and peaceful. Can we get ice cream now? Tommy asked hopefully. Like practice for meeting them. James laughed. A real laugh, the first one in weeks. Sure, buddy. Practice makes perfect, right? At the ice cream shop, they sat together at a small table, watching Tommy create an elaborate sundae. Sarah reached across the table and took James's hand. I know we have a long way to go, she said quietly, but thank you for trying, for not giving up on us. James squeezed her hand. In the army, we never leave anyone behind. That includes family. Tommy returned with his ice cream mountain, chocolate sauce dripping everywhere. Dad, look, I made a bridge with the wafers. Looking at his son's smiling face, James felt something shift inside him. The pain wasn't gone, but it was changing shape, becoming something they could build from rather than something that could destroy them. This wasn't the family story he'd imagined, but maybe it could be something even better. A story about forgiveness, growth, and the kind of love that builds bridges instead of walls. The day of the 3 children who shared the same laugh, the same way of scrunching their noses when they smiled. He saw David watching Tommy with a gentle reverence, careful not to overstep. They brought me something, Tommy said, returning to the table with the gift bag Emma had given him. Inside was a framed photo of Emma and Lily at their last baseball game, with space next to it. They said we could take a picture today to put in the other side. Sarah felt tears forming. That's very thoughtful, girls. Can we? Tommy asked. Take a picture, with everyone. The adults exchanged glances. It was David's wife Jessica who spoke up. I think that's a wonderful idea, a new kind of family portrait. They asked the ice cream shop owner to take the photo. Tommy stood in the middle, with Emma and Lily on either side. Behind them, James and Sarah stood next to David and Jessica. Just before the photo, James put his hand on Tommy's shoulder, a silent reminder of their unbreakable bond. Later that evening, as they drove home, Tommy clutched his new photo frame. Dad, he said quietly, thank you for being brave today. James caught Tommy's eye in the rearview mirror. You're the brave one, buddy. You showed us all how to handle this with grace. Sarah reached over and squeezed James's hand. We all were brave today, and we'll keep being brave together. At home, Tommy ran upstairs to find the perfect spot for his new photo. Sarah turned to James in the kitchen. Are you okay? James pulled her into a hug, surprising her. You know what I learned in the army, that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands beside you when things get tough. Today, I saw our family get bigger, not smaller. Upstairs, they'd heard Tommy talking on the phone. Emma had called to make plans for their next baseball game. His laughter echoed through the house, no longer strained or guarded. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Sarah whispered against James's chest. James thought about the day's events, the awkward start, the genuine smiles, the way Tommy's eyes shone when his sisters gave him their gift. Yeah, he said softly. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be extraordinary. Because sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is lay down his armor and open his heart to new possibilities. 1 year had passed since that first ice cream meeting. The Mitchells' backyard was filled with laughter and music as they celebrated Tommy's 10th birthday. The party was special. It was the first time both families had come together for a major celebration. James stood at the grill, cooking hamburgers and hot dogs, while David helped set up the baseball equipment for the kids' game they had planned. What had once been awkward silence between the two men had evolved into a comfortable understanding. "Dad, David, are you guys going to play on opposite teams?" Tommy called out, wearing the new baseball jersey he'd gotten that morning, a gift from both fathers. "Sure thing, buddy," James replied, sharing a knowing look with David. "But you have to promise to go easy on us old guys." Emma and Laylee were helping Sarah and Jessica decorate the cake in the kitchen. The girls had become regular visitors to the Mitchell home, often joining Tommy for baseball practice or homework sessions. Their presence had brought an unexpected joy to the house. "Remember last year?" Sarah asked James quietly as she brought out more supplies for the grill. "We were so scared everything would fall apart." James nodded, watching Tommy teach his sisters how to grip a baseball properly. Instead, everything fell into place. The past year hadn't been without its challenges. There had been confused relatives to explain things to, awkward moments at school events, and plenty more counseling sessions with Dr. Carter. But they had faced each obstacle together, as a family, or rather, as two families who had learned to become one extended unit. Tommy had flourished with the support of both families. His grades had improved, his confidence had grown, and the nervous boy who once hid letters in his desk had become an open, happy child who loved having two families to share his life with. "Cake time," Jessica called out, bringing out a spectacular baseball-themed creation. 10 candles flickered in the evening light as everyone gathered to sing. Tommy closed his eyes to make his wish, surrounded by both his parents and his biological father's family. James watched his son's face glow in the candlelight, remembering the day he'd come home from deployment to find his world turned upside down. Now, he couldn't imagine their family any other way. "What did you wish for?" Lily asked eagerly after Tommy blew out the candles. "Can't tell," Tommy grinned. "But I don't need to wish for much anymore. I already have everything I want." Later, as the sun began to set, they organized the promised baseball game. Tommy stood on the pitcher's mound, with James catching and David at bat. Emma and Lily cheered from the makeshift dugout, while Sarah and Jessica kept score. "Remember?" Tommy called out to David. "No going easy on me just because it's my birthday." "Wouldn't dream of it," David laughed, tapping the bat against home plate. James watched his son wind up for the pitch, feeling a surge of pride. The boy had inherited David's natural athletic ability, but it was James who had spent countless hours practicing with him in this very backyard. Both men had contributed to making Tommy the person he was becoming. As the evening wound down and David's family prepared to leave, Tommy hugged each person goodbye. "Best birthday ever," he declared. "Next weekend at our house for the girls' recital," Jessica reminded them. "Wouldn't miss it," Sarah promised, helping to pack up leftover cake for them to take home. After everyone had left, Tommy sat between James and Sarah on the porch swing, tired but happy. "Dad," he said, looking up at James, "remember when you said we had to be brave to build bridges?" "I do," James replied, curious where this was going. "Well, I think we built a really good one, strong enough for everyone to walk on." Sarah wiped away a tear, pulling her son close. "The strongest bridge of all," she agreed. James looked at his family, because that's what they were, regardless of DNA or circumstances. His military training had taught him that the strongest units were built not on orders or obligation, but on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. This unconventional family had proven that lesson true. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, James thought about how far they'd come from that tense homecoming a year ago. The secret that had threatened to tear them apart had instead become the foundation for something bigger and more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. Sometimes, he realized, the best families aren't the ones we're born into or the ones we plan for. They're the ones we build together, with courage, love, and an open heart.